All right, everybody. We have our penultimate talk. It's going to be Zachary Hunsaker, I think I pronounced that right, presenting Open Source Intelligence. What does the internet know about you? Please give him a round of applause.
Howdy. Thank you so much. And first of all, just like to say I'm super excited to be here. And if you're expecting some sexy talk where I'm going to put a whole bunch of dark web secrets and stuff on the in the presentation, that's not going to be what we're doing. But we'll talk about a little bit about what we are doing, because hopefully we can give you some open source intelligence to bring back to your business and implement some things that will help make your business better and maybe streamline and improve some processes. So, and hopefully we can see this. It's I didn't plan on a projector. I probably should have, but mostly I'm going to be talking about what's up here. It's not really heavy in visuals and everything. So, first off, I'll just talk about who I am and why maybe you would care about anything I have to say. Currently, I'm an OSINT security engineer at AbbVie. It's a pharmaceutical company. We do some really interesting stuff. Right now, my primary function for AbbVie is I'm automating the OSINT process that we use for mergers and acquisitions. And some of the interesting things we get to do with that is when a new company that we're targeting for a merger or an acquisition is coming onto the radar of the merger and acquisitions team, they'll reach out to us and they'll ask us, hey, can you take a look at this business and tell us everything you can find about their information security footprint. They don't want any big, scary things happening after a merger or acquisition, like ransomware. They want to be aware of any misconfigurations, any issues that we might run into, so that they can either leverage that to, maybe sweeten the deal a little bit, with the understanding that we'll go and, fix those things after the fact. Or so we can back away slowly and pretend like we were never interested. Currently, I'm automating a bunch of the processes that have already been kind of put in place by some of my peers, and I'd like to say thank you to those wonderful people at AbbVie that have been helping that. Previously, I worked at AWS. I was a security engineer on the CloudFormation team. We got to do some interesting stuff at scale for infrastructure as code, and if you've ever used CloudFormation, it's a very interesting product, highly recommended that if you're doing things at scale at AWS, either the SDK that CloudFormation offers or CloudFormation itself are both really powerful tools that I think are very underutilized. And some interesting things about that is we've actually, during my time there, some of the things that we ran into would be from bug bounty programs, and some of the biggest things that were found with OSINT. I can't go too much into that because of NDAs and all that jazz, but what we're doing here is very applicable, and OSINT will definitely help us out. Before that, I was an incident responder and security engineer at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And I'm also a recovering Java developer, which was my first position. A big shout out to any of you who write Java all day. You're the unsung heroes. I like to joke that Java is basically what runs the whole internet. Like, it's Java all the way down, Java and caffeine. So a little bit more about me, aside from my technical background. I'm a dad. That's my most important job, and I really love it. Shout out to all the dads out there. And I'm a permaculturist. So one of my big hobbies is I like to, build an ecosystem on some property that I bought here in Tennessee, which thank you, Tennessee, for accepting me as a refugee from the state of Wyoming. And I'm very big into fermentation and cultured food. So some interesting things. If you want to talk about those, you can hit me up on Twitter. This is my Twitter handle, and there is a giant QR code that you can scan if you're interested in following me on Twitter. At the end of this, I'll also provide slides for this deck. And again, this isn't a PowerPoint presentation. I apologize for how crazy it's going to be because of the extra light in here, but we'll continue. So in this talk, I want to talk a little bit about the intelligence lifecycle. Is anybody here familiar with the intelligence lifecycle as it permits to intelligence gathering and everything? A little bit? Okay, so I want to talk about that because it's really important for making OSINT applicable to your business. After that, we'll talk about OSINT and some of the steps and like some of the places in the intelligence lifecycle that it really shines. And we'll talk about why those things are important for your businesses. Because at the end of the day, that's what pays the bills, that's what lets us be here. And I think OSINT can actually be a very critical step of what you're doing. And I imagine it's something that you are all using to some degree, even if you're just Googling for an answer on, a question, or if you're using an RSS feed for finding vulnerabilities that you need to patch in your organizations. So the goals of this session, I want to talk a little bit about the risks associated with your company's online presence. There's probably a lot more out there, especially for publicly traded companies, than you might be aware of. And I want to talk a little bit about the best practices that we can use for defending against online attacks via these vectors. Specifically, we'll be focusing on a lot of policies. I'll also mention some tooling and some training that you might get if you're more interested in bringing more open source intelligence to your business for optimizing your business processes. And lastly, I hope you'll learn a little bit about the benefits of integrating OSINT into your organization, either as a standalone function, like my job is currently at AbbVie, which I'm super excited about, or as a typical day-to-day activity that you do as part of your job, whether it's in the help desk, security operations center, pen testing, whatever it might be. So I'm going to actually zoom out here a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about the intelligence lifecycle. So this is just basically a process that the intelligence community set up a few years ago, well, a long time ago, on how they collect intelligence and the processes involved within that. From the beginning, planning stages, to the very end where you're disseminating reports and gathering feedback. So there's 6 main steps. The first one being your planning stage. There's a lot to this. You need to be aware of what your requirements are. This is where you start, whether you're writing software, whether you're setting up infrastructure, whether you're trying to secure your organization. And as part of open source intelligence, it's critically important as well. You define your requirements and objectives. So at AbbVie, for example, our requirements are we want to know everything we possibly can without actually attempting to do a penetration test or scanning or any of those activities of a third party for a merger or an acquisition. You need to identify your potential sources of information. There's a lot of them. If you are a publicly traded company and you fill out those SEC reports every year, your 10Q is one of the first places I will go when I am searching for information on your company, where you talk about breach announcements, when you talk about insider trading, when you talk about anything that you have to fill out relating to your business to the SEC. That's definitely going to be one of the first places I go, again, if you're a publicly traded company. So collection, and I put little monikers up here, you probably can't see them. The collection phase is what I like to call, I don't have enough disk space. So OSINT is one of those intelligence disciplines where there is more information available than you can probably gather and process. So you need to be a little bit pickier about it. There's a lot going on. So specifically at AbbVie, one of the things I go and do is when we're looking at acquiring another company that is selling a drug that we're interested in being able to sell at a later date or that's in their pipeline, one of the first places I'll go is the darknet markets. I'm going to go see if there is a generic version of that drug available on any of those sites, or if there's a copycat of any of those from suppliers in east of here. We'll just put it that way. And then social media collection. This is a treasure trove of data, and most of it will come from not the business public media presence, but that of its CEOs, of its employees. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go into some of the stories that we'll talk about here. Next, there's the processing and exploitation phase. I also call this the import pandas as PD stage, because this is where you're taking your information and you're going to compile it into a readable format And pandas is one of those libraries in Python that I absolutely could not live without. It's critical for what I do on a daily basis. And it's a great way to take and organize and filter data and be able to put it into a data frame so that you can continue to process it. I'll just briefly go over some of these other stages, but the analysis and production stage, this is where you actually need an analyst on the ground to take a look at the data and be able to interpret it and translate it to the business. So you need to be able to take all this information that you're finding. It's very similar to a pen test report where you're taking and you're analyzing the vulnerabilities, seeing if there's actual impact, and being able to start producing a report. Next is the dissemination phase, where you actually communicate these findings to the business. This is critically important because this is where decisions get made, as you're very well aware. You need to process this in a way and be able to visualize this information. One of the things I found is the first few reports that I gave to my employer, there was too much reading involved. And I don't mean that to be mean. Decision makers are busy. They have tons of meetings every day, and they have a lot of information and context switching that they have to do. So the more visual you can make these reports, the more impactful they'll be for the business. Bright red stop sign like don't buy this because X, Y, Z. And then the feedback and evaluation. This is a stage that gets overlooked a lot, but you need to sit down and talk to your key stakeholders after disseminating a report like this and basically ask, what worked, what didn't? Did you understand, this from this information that I provided? How could, try and understand their business position a little bit better so you can translate the report of the technical or other complex findings you have and be able to translate it into business speak. And I found that this is critically important. So let's talk a little bit about open source intelligence as its own discipline. So open source intelligence, as we mentioned before, there's a plethora of information available. Basically anything accessible on the internet or other protocols, not just the internet, that's openly available is fair game. There's legal implications that you need to look for, specific use cases. If I go anonymously log into an FTP server that has the banner that says, hey, please don't come onto here, that's obviously an ethical consideration you need to take into account. So don't do that. But open source intelligence, as we mentioned before, there's lots of problems associated with it as well. First is the data volume. There's more info than you'll ever be able to go over. Reliability. Open source intelligence data can be generated on the fly. We're living in a time with artificial intelligence. Has anybody played with, ChatGPT or something with it? It's insane the quantity and volume of information that it could put out. I spent a couple weeks ago. I took and I actually had it generate a fake LinkedIn profile for me. Like, here's all the places I've worked. Here's all the blah 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 for a Puppet account to be able to do investigations. And it was amazing the things that the little nuances that it would throw in. And so being able to reliably verify the sources that we're gathering with OSINT is one of our more critical problems that we need to address. And data quality. So quality doesn't mean reliability here. Specifically, I'm talking about the unstructured format that we find a lot of times. If you're going and reading a blog post on somebody's blog that they wrote 12 years ago, there's a lot of processing that you have to do in order to automate that and make that valuable. So first, let's talk a little bit about the collection phase in open source intelligence. We're gathering from public sources. Websites, social media, news articles, government reports. I'd mentioned the EDGAR database that the SEC has for reports that the publicly traded companies have to do. Public records. This is a treasure trove. Here in Tennessee and many other states, I don't know if you're aware, but there is a land parcel database that if you've ever owned land or bought a property, if you're a landowner, essentially, your information is probably in this database, and it's open to the internet. You can go request your information to get out. But when I'm searching for somebody, that's a really good source of information. There's lots of things like that. I want to mention some interesting trainings or tools that you can take a look at. So OSINT Curious is a good one. This is by Mike Hoffman. The OSINT, which is Joe here? No, okay. So Joe Gray, he's one of the organizers here. He has a great training available for open source intelligence. Inteltechniques.com. This is a really interesting one. So Mike Bazell is largely considered the godfather of OSINT. He is very focused on privacy and kind of removing himself from a lot of these open source intelligence, databases or places. And he has a wealth of information and knowledge available on his website here, which I got to say, last time I gave this talk, I had people going here, and it was actually the day that his website got taken down and all the information. So please, I hope that doesn't happen now. He's a great resource, and there's actually really good tools there that he tries to keep up to date for doing manual investigations on phone numbers, on domain names, IP addresses, usernames that can help you track down somebody's username across various social media sites. It's a great resource if you're looking for that. There's another tool here called Obsidian Markdown. It's a great knowledge database that you should keep for yourself. OSINT is one of those things that the tools that you're using or the techniques that you find, they're probably going to break tomorrow. I have my GitHub page with skeletons of projects that I was working on where the next day the vendor found, we didn't mean to release this information, and they fixed it and my tool no longer works, right? So it's a cat and mouse game that's frequently happening, but the thing that doesn't change a lot is your framework for, here's my process for going and investigating things, and I found that Obsidian is one of those tools that lets me do a mind map and kind of track down some of those things. I'll also say RSS feeds are one of my favorite tools. If you aren't using one, I highly recommend it, even just for vulnerability tracking. But there's lots of tools out there that you can have web pages, Twitter feeds, all of that converted into an RSS feed. So it's a great source of information to be able to programmatically grab those types of things and process them. I'll kind of skip over the processing and exploitation, the other stages, but they're very important from an open source intelligence perspective. But I'd like to get a little bit more to the meat and potatoes, the why we're here. So let's talk a little bit about your businesses and how we might be oversharing information and some of the implications of those things. So first, data breaches. It's on everybody's mind. And a lot of them can happen because of oversharing of company information online. With information that's publicly accessible, there are frequent cases where we're more at risk of a data breach because of it. Who here has seen one of those pictures on Twitter or LinkedIn or something where somebody's like taking a picture and they're like, it's my first day at this company, super excited. Anybody? I can't be the only one. Okay, so everybody's seen one. Does anybody know why people do that? It's a serious question, anybody? They're excited. We are social human beings. Social media took off because of the dopamine hits and everything, but it's because we're social creatures. We want to include people in our lives that we care about. So when they're sitting there taking a picture and saying, like, look how excited I am, it's not a terrible thing for them to want to do. It's a terrible thing for your business. Recently I found, while I was looking at an organization, I found a tweet from somebody said, it's my first day, super excited. And it was a picture of what? Their badge. It was a picture of their badge, which makes, being able to copy one of those RFID tags super easy to do. You can see the format that they're using, the type of logo they're using, which seems innocuous enough until you realize that they're also sharing where they're going to go on their, with their group after their first day. And they say, hey, we're all going to meet at this bar, after work. I'm super excited. I have an awesome new team. So you go there with a Proxmark or something, and you walk by and beep, and you've got a picture, you've got their badge, you know the hours where they're going to be at work or when they might be when they might be somewhere after work, and it starts to look a little bit scarier. Another example I have, this really happened and it's really sad. Who here can tell me what an Etsy shadow is? Go ahead. Yeah, it's the actual document on a Unix system that stores your password, and it's not easy to get to. You need you need escalated privileges to get it. I was investigating some open indexes. I was investigating. My boss had asked me to go and look at, and this is a former employer. I'm just going to say that now, so that's abundantly clear. He's like, we have a problem. We're getting a lot of reports from a third party about these open indexes. Can you go take a look? I said, okay, let's go take a look. So I'm going through some open indexes, and I'm seeing a lot of publicly available data, some web servers that are just misconfigured incorrectly. You can see the files in there, nothing too crazy. And I get to about the 6th one down, like on my list of servers to go check. And I go on to here and I see a folder called backups. So I go to backups. I'm like, okay, well, this looks interesting. There is some commands that they run to do backups, like their scripts that they're using with hard-coded credentials, I might add. There is a copy of the data that they're backing up into a folder, date and time stamped. And in one of these, there is your Etsy password and your Etsy shadow files. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's old. Maybe it's just from an old, Solaris system. I guess that's a joke we're doing today. And so I go and I investigate, and I'm like, I have a coworker that is amazing at cracking passwords. If you ask him anything about Hashcat, he can tell you all the flags and everything. And I say, hey, can you try this? See if you can crack any of these. And I go over to his cubicle, and we're sitting there talking about it, and he's pulling it up. He types in his crazy Hashcat command, and he hits enter, and password found. It just it was an instant pop-up, and it was a really terrible password. And all of this happened because somebody misconfigured a server. Your directory is open to the internet, and somebody can find it via Google Docs, or some technique that is relatively easy to do. So be mindful that this can happen in the blink of an eye. It only takes once for something like this to get out, and you'll be amazed at how fast people start hitting these types of directories. There's a lot of automated tools that are going out and looking for these types of things. Luckily we went into incident response mode and we were able to get this figured out, and luckily, checked logs and everything. Nobody had used these credentials yet for doing anything malicious, and it was kind of contained, but it wasn't a fun day, I can tell you that. Another incident that I had similar to that is same place I was working. I start the day, go and talk to the security operations center, and we're working on a few things. And one of the things I've been working on is, anybody here heard of a tool called Shodan? Census.io, everybody's heard of it, right? So I had set up some alerts with Shodan to say, here's our IP range. If anything new pops up, let me know. So I go sit down, and I'm going, and I'm doing some work, and then all of a sudden I hear a ping, 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 and my email is just freaking out. And I go and I look at one of these emails, and it's like, this IP address, this is new, here's the port, go check it out. Turns out, and I'm glad I set up this alert, and this is something everybody should go look at doing if you're not monitoring these types of things. Our building operations systems had been publicly exposed to the internet. So there had been a router misconfiguration. Somebody was updating some router rules and ended up accidentally pushing out, a change that made it so that they became publicly accessible to the internet. Luckily, we were on that one a lot faster than we would have been otherwise, and we're able to do some damage control there. So let's talk about risk number 2, brand damage. you can get your company broiled into a scandal that will damage their reputation and their brand to the point where it becomes difficult for some people to do business with them. I'm not going to say that every business is going to shut down because somebody says something bad on social media, but it's an optic that you really don't want your businesses to run into. I'm going to share, there's a quick news story I pulled up. This happened a few days ago. There was a New York hospital that fired an employee who worked in a morgue, and they were taking selfies with deceased people, which isn't a good look if you're in the business of working with people. And so it's one of those things that brand, that hospital, when you search for them, I can almost guarantee for the next few years in the Google search results, you're going to see that article. And you're going to say, I really don't want to bring my mom or dad there because the employee's gone, but the damage persists. Intellectual property theft. This is one of those that I have the privilege of working with frequently. This is the sharing of information online that could expose your company to theft, to reputational damage, to government problems if you're sharing proprietary government information, et cetera. So this is another one where this guy I worked with we were doing some threat hunting. We got the security operations center kind of set up the way we wanted with a few new people, and we decided to go do some threat hunting. So we were searching our space, and I was using a Google Dork, and I basically said, give me all the PDFs that you can find on my domain. And I'm like, okay, well, what could be out there? Well, it was an educational research institution, and a lot of the information that we had, we just gave out. There were a lot of publications that we shared. So I was going through a bunch of these and using some tools to help me kind of filter out some of the stuff that's very technical that we had hashes of from documents that we published. And something really interesting stood up. So there was a schematic for satellites. Has anybody heard of the Cosmic mission? So this isn't a very well-known one, so I would have been surprised if somebody had. So the Cosmic mission was a collaboration between the National Center for Atmospheric Research and some government agencies. And they published some schematics for some satellites, and they sent some satellites into space that have sensors on them for measuring climate and weather data. Really cool tech, really cool things they're doing with these satellites. Turns out the specs were available on one of our web servers, and the document was marked ITAR, which if you're not familiar with ITAR, this was a very, very bad thing. Fortunately for us, and we put processes around it after the fact, it had been declassified as ITAR by one of the agencies we were working with a very long time ago. So this had been out there for a very, very long time. But when we searched some of our logs, there was traffic from external countries and entities that we weren't too friendly with. So just be careful. It can be a user that has access to publish their information on their personal site that you make for them. A lot of people, here's your company profile, and they allow people to, publish this subsection of data in those. And you would be very surprised at what some people put out there. It could be a CV, which is, it's useful if you're trying to target for spear phishing or something like that, but it's not going to end the world. But you will see crazy information put out via PDFs, open indexes, all those types of things. So let's talk about phishing now that we've talked about that, phishing and social engineering. Sorry, I get a really dry mouth. So criminals are always looking for opportunities to exploit information that you share online. They'll steal images of people and try and impersonate people on Facebook, LinkedIn. Has anybody seen this? My wife has a grandmother that frequently is friend requesting her. It's not her, it's an impersonation. Somebody steals her image every other week and attempts to, to scam people out of money, using my wife's my wife's grandmother basically as the decoy. So it's something that attackers have automated processes for spinning these types of things up, working on, they take an account that they've set up 2 years ago, put on a new image, add some information to it, and they'll try and use that as a pretext for social engineering. Okay. So this is another really fun one. So company I was working for, they were building a new building. They were building a new facility, and the construction company that they were using was in a picture for the groundbreaking ceremony. Seems innocuous enough, right? And I'm not here to fearmonger. I just want you to, I hope you understand that everything we do in the public light has consequences, right? So this construction company was in one of the pictures. And that company got targeted by some phishing attacks, and one of them was successful. And an attacker was able to take over an email account. So business email compromise. You can all see where this is going. And one of our finance people gets a message that says, hey, we haven't received payment for X number of days, and here's our new ACH information. We had processes in place to take advantage, to make sure that nothing malicious like this happened. Nothing's 100%, unfortunately. They got rushed. It was a Friday at 4 p.m., had a soccer game or something to go to, and sent the payment. Turns out it was a payment for about $1 million. So my next 3 weeks were meant, helping clean that mess up, reporting that to the proper authorities. But because a picture was in the newspaper, the local newspaper, and on their website, of a construction company breaking ground with the organization I was working for, somebody targeted them and was able to, compromise an email and be able to make off with some money. I actually don't know how that one ended. I ended up leaving very shortly after that. Hopefully it was a good ending and the FBI caught the people, but there are real world consequences to the information we share online. Legal and compliance risks. So, sorry, this fell down. All right. Regulation. So I'll cruise past this one really quick, but the UK fined TikTok recently, a total of $15.8 million for TikTok breaking GDPR, for sharing information with third parties that they didn't have access to do. And then competitive disadvantage. If you share your internal processes or strategies online, competitors are going to take advantage. It's something that every company has a competitive edge that they're looking to gain. And if one of your competitors say, hey, here's how I make this drug, better believe I'm going to be out there trying to find that information and share that as well. So how can we defend our employees? And I'm sorry I've rambled on forever. A lot of them are the things other speakers have talked about today, and we've been very lucky to hear about a lot of these things, but employee education and awareness, make sure they're aware of some of these things. One of the things I mentioned before was the first day of work. Something you can do to help employees feel like they belong, that they can share with their life. Have a place where before they get badges, they come in, you explain to them, hey, we're excited to have you. We want you to take a picture. You can share this on social media. Please don't share in XYZ spaces. That way, when I look in the background of a picture of your first day and I see a key, I can go and find some really awesome OSINT guy. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he has these key templates, and you can actually put that on top of pictures, and you can figure out what kind of key they use for specific things. Or I can fish you with a vendor message from that vendor that you're using. So raise awareness in those types of places, but you can also make policies or processes that still allow those kind of things to happen. Strong password policies. I won't beat this to death, but multi-factor authentication is by far one of the best mitigating factors for a lot of these things. Implement privacy settings and engineering into all the products that you're building. Privacy engineering should be almost as important as your security engineering. They go very much hand in hand. And the more privacy you build for your employees and you build into your products, the less juicy of a target you'll be. Safe online practices and give employees good information. If you have a threat intelligence team, if you have somebody that does a newsletter for your employees, send out really good information. Make it high quality. Make sure that it's usable. Down here in the potential references, and again, these slides are available to you, and I apologize for how bad they are, but there's a couple really good resources here. One of them is free, and it's how to freeze your credit, and a whole bunch of other really important things that employees can do it takes them to a bunch of data brokers where they can remove their information. For anybody that's privacy conscious, it's a really good resource. And it's a really good way for them to be able to go and see, this is how I can lock down my social media accounts. Here is a list of procedures I think every company should have. A social media usage policy. Where and when can you use, social media in a business context? Password security policy, privacy policy, phishing awareness and email security policy. And that should be more a process than a policy, so I apologize for that. Bring your own device policies, what's allowed on your network, what can employees bring, can they bring things with cameras in certain places based on your threat models. Data classification and handling policy. Make sure that a document that is marked business critical, has proprietary information, is never dangling in an open index or not behind role-based access controls. We heard from the Dragos presenter this morning that role-based access control implemented properly really saved the day for them. And then make sure if you are doing any employee monitoring, make sure you have an employee monitoring and acceptable use policy for those types of things. Here's a list of tasks that I think a dedicated OSINT analyst, these are great places to start if you want to bring OSINT into your organization. So they make a great start to a threat intelligence team, and you can go further with that and bring in other methods besides just open source intelligence. You can have them serve as a backup for incident responders and your SOC teams. Monitoring brand reputation and online presence. If you have a social media team, or they can serve as a way to track for imposter domains and other places in an organization that don't frequently get looked at but can cause a lot of damage. And then here's a list of jobs that I put together that OSINT plays a really critical role. So obviously cyber threat intelligence analysts, as we talked about. Forensics people should have some awareness, some situational awareness of what's going on, and open source intelligence is definitely a key part of that. Fraud analysts should have an awareness of OSINT techniques that are being used for fraud in organizations to help provide more information there. Risk analysts, and one of the things I do, obviously, due diligence investigator, so I help the mergers and acquisitions team with due diligence. And I really think that's one of the better places sorry, for a bigger business, if you want to start using open source intelligence. And then market research, if you have a market research team, bring open source intelligence into finding salary data, or to enrich any data sets that are currently being collected. And then social media analysts, make sure that people are out there looking at your social media footprint and that of your employees to look for those crazy things that happen on the internet. So I hope you've learned something today. I really appreciate your time. There is a QR code here for the slide deck. You can also find it at my GitHub, which is 5A4B48 on GitHub. That's easy to remember because it's ZKH, just in hexadecimal. So, any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hold on, 1 second. Here you go. I work in healthcare, and we have providers that have their NPI number freely available on the internet. Is there any way to stop that or block that information or pull it from the internet?
So again, I'd reference you to Michael Bazell with some of that stuff, but with some of the search engine stuff, it's really hard. Once something's out there, it's really hard to get it down. There are some really interesting techniques that I can reference you to some tools and stuff if you shoot me a message, or we can talk after this. Anybody else?
You mentioned land docs and SEC filings. What do you is your process vastly different for private companies or?
Absolutely. Private companies are a little bit harder because they're not mandated to share information. But what I've also found is that social media tends to be the best place to find information on private companies, mostly because a lot of them are either looking to be acquired or they're looking to form relationships with bigger companies. So I found that marketing person for organizations is a great place to start, and the CEO tends to overshare a little bit for most companies. But another good source for information there might be, something you can do is go look for, if you can link a personal email address to somebody, go look in breach history, and you'll almost certainly find one-off usernames or accounts that they're maybe using somewhere else, and frequently they'll have other information available in those types of places. So,
Awesome.
thank you. Here and then here. Go ahead.
Me first. Yeah, I know you mentioned some tools like OSINT Curious and OSINT, and all the data is enormous that you collect, but do you have a place where you compile all your stuff, where you store it, where you start to do it like a template as you're building your OSINT profile?
I mentioned it before too. It's called obsidian.md.
Oh, okay, that's what.
I think every OSINT practitioner, everybody that's doing OSINT should have their own knowledge base. You should share, but everybody's process is going to be a little bit different because we all have different neural pathways, and the way we view the world is drastically different. And something that works for you won't work for me. But yeah, that would be my recommendation. And Mike Hoffman on his blog has a great template for OSINT. That's a great starting point.
Just kind of following up on that question,
Mark.
Do you have any educational resources that you recommend or anything like that in learning a lot of this stuff? Because it does change all the time and stuff like
Absolutely.
that. So it's as soon as you catch up with it, you're back at it again. So what have you found that kind of keeps up with a lot of that?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and I will freely admit that. I will say if you look for the Open Source Intelligence and Privacy podcast by Michael Bazell, he's frequently updating tools. He's probably the most up-to-date on trying to keep things updated. The man must not sleep because he's constantly doing things. But that's a great resource. And then, there's some in the slide. In the slides, if you grab them on GitHub, there's some other resources there that might be helpful. Cool. Any other questions? Cool. I think that's time, and I really appreciate everybody.